This is Alamo Anthem, where we, the overtaxed, remember our liberty. Direct from the forgotten countryside outside of Alamo City, San Antonio.
Welcome. We don't welcome very often.
Welcomes.
We just don't welcome. But I do want to welcome today, and here's why. I want to give our listeners our email so we can hear some feedback from them and give them a chance to tell us what they're thinking about, tell us what's on their mind. So to contact us, email us at atlasanthem@gmail.com. I'll say that again. atlasanthem@gmail.com. So hopefully we'll hear from some of our listeners.
Should we spell that?
Yes. atlasanthem@gmail.com. And it's on our show notes as well. So, all right.
Great. Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah. And also, I went to Nextdoor app this week with all this border chaos and posed a question to some of our neighbors. And it was kind of an interesting conversation. Okay. So the question I posed this week was just wanted to hear what some of my neighbors think about what is going on at the border in regards to this Texas standoff with the feds. We will be discussing this anyway, blah, blah, blah. So Jeannie Wilson stated, I, for one, and I think she's in Divine, stand with Texas and Governor Abbott on this. What you might also want to research for your podcast is where the money is coming from to support these immigrants. And I think that's a good point. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. The bill that Biden is trying to pass for even more money. More than the trillions that they already have. That's all.
So, but who's funding this? What's going on? Like the immigration, the migration?
I don't know. I mean, is it through the Homeland Security? Is it just budgetary through that?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's the federal government, like whoever, is.
So I think it's the federal government and NGOs, non-government organizations.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I saw a thing with I'll have to look for the article I read, but
So where's that money really coming from?
well, that's what these non-government organizations. Who knows? Who knows who funds them? I mean, we all know.
We all know.
Soros.
And what their aim is, right? Like,
Yeah.
why are they funding this?
Yeah. And so, but I've learned this past week, because this border thing has really caught my attention, that I don't know how many of our listeners know this, Joe, but you and I have talked about this, that the CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, have actively been perpetrating the issue.
Yeah, human smuggling, if not trafficking outright, human smuggling. Because a lot of these people, they'll charter a bus or an airplane or whatever, and the people working in those places, they don't know who these people are. There's no identification. They're just told to just kind of push these people through. And so it's like, if nothing else, it's like they're moving people around without telling anybody who they're doing it with or whatever, so.
Which really, I would say for average-ish people like us, every now and then at least, I'll have this thought process where I think, oh yeah, it'd be nice if we could, go here or there, or, just if we could afford a flight, or, flights for our family to go see people that we'd like to see or something. And you think, too bad we can't get some of those free flights.
Right.
You know what I mean? When you know that, all you have to do is cross the border illegally, and then you get a free flight wherever you want.
It's not just that they, the people that have reported on this, they go down and they see that they throw away all of their documents and identification before they get to the border, because it's easier for the whole process if they just don't know who they are. Like, they're not going to vet them or anything. And so it's like, it's like not having an identity, being here legally is more advantageous for the free, flight across the country.
Right.
Though that I'm sure they don't have any control over where they're going or anything like that.
I heard they do.
Yeah,
I've
heard that they do also.
I heard that they ask Border Patrol where the Border Patrol asks them where they'd like to go, and they bus them to wherever they want.
Yeah, and fly
I mean,
them.
I think they have choices. I don't think it's just like, where do you want to go? I'm sure they have like certain buses that go to this particular city, this particular, and they just get on the one they want. Also, we know from whistleblowers that they're not just getting bused, they're getting flown on airplanes.
Yeah.
Emily talked about that. But even more than that, without names on these plane tickets.
Right. It says no name given. And they even have...
And yet we still have to go through TSA and all that.
Right.
We have to go through TSA.
It's like, okay, well, who's paying the airline or the bus business company or whatever for them? Oh, well, they are, because they are getting paid. It's not like the buses and the airlines are like forced to donate it. Yeah. So they are getting paid. Oh, it's the government. Oh, okay. Where's the government get all their money? Oh, from us. Okay. So we're paying for them, whoever they are, who knows, to go wherever they want. And then we can't afford to travel ourselves wherever we want. Yeah.
And it's particularly galling because it's like what we said, they don't know who they are. They don't know. I mean, just a short few years ago or, a couple of years ago, we couldn't fly without wearing a mask. And depending on what city you went to, they would say, you're going to have to show that you were vaxxed,
right?
Within the last, 7 days or whatever. They don't have anything like that,
I was just telling our oldest son this the other day. He's 15, but I was like, did you know that when we first, me and you, when we were teenagers and we first ever flew on planes, that we could just walk in and you had your ticket, you just walk up to the gate, show them your ticket, and walk onto the plane.
You didn't even need a ticket to walk to the gate. You could wait for people at the gate.
Right. We were able to greet each other as they got off the plane.
I did that once with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember.
Coming back from Georgia.
Oh, but wait, you had to go through a metal detector. Don't you remember?
I don't actually.
It was the most easy, probably budget-friendly metal detector ever.
Right.
But as annoying as all of this seems, and it is, it is annoying to feel like, someone or some entity is constantly stealing from you. A worse scenario that I've heard about is we all know that there's all these college students or recent college grads who, they're in tons of debt for a degree that's not really panning out in the real, workforce. And so they're just making money whatever other way that they can as in restaurants or bars or something. And they can barely afford to live in these cities where they live. And they're paying $2,000 for a month for very few square feet that they're probably sharing with other roommates even. And then meanwhile, they have coworkers from these, who are the people that we're talking about who are here illegally. And they're being put up in a nice hotel for free. Right. So on the one hand, I find that I constantly run into this same thought process where I think, that's terrible. And then the very next thing I think is, that's good. Because if it over and over again, it's okay, obviously this is a great injustice. But if the injustice does wake more people up, like the Gen Z or Gen whatever, is that the right generation?
I think we're on Z now.
Okay. But if anything that wakes people up, on the other hand, it's a double-edged sword. So it is you had to feel the injustice, which is crappy. But at the same time, if more people wake up and pay attention, then that's good.
That's why I think Abbott, because a lot of people are criticizing Abbott even here in Texas, saying, why did he
even
do
here
this?
In this room?
Yeah. Why did he wait so long to shut the border and do something about it? And why now? Is it all because of the election year? What is it?
And I would say yes. Keep going.
Yeah. Although I do agree that I do think that he did it systematically. All of him shipping those migrants, busing those migrants to those areas did exactly what you're talking about.
To Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah. It exposed, one, the hypocrisy of the left who says that they care, which they don't. But, and as soon as the rubber met the road and they showed up to Martha's Vineyard, they were like, oh my gosh.
We'll give you a meal and then you're out of here.
Yeah, it's
basically.
They don't mean what they say. Yeah. It's all just...
Well, and what their reasons is we don't have the infrastructure here to deal with all these people. It's yeah, exactly. Who does?
That's right.
These are what we used to call NIMBYs, right?
Right, not in my backyard.
Yeah, the not in my backyard people.
Yeah, and then the second thing that they exposed was well, not expose, but the second purpose of Abbott shipping them, it was to show the average Joe in places like Chicago and New York City what it's like to live in a border state, and how through these democratic policies, the average person who pays taxes is getting pushed aside, while those that are coming across the border illegally get all the benefits, and basically, like you're talking about, Emily, like some of them are getting pushed out of their own schools. Like their kids are getting
Right.
pushed out of their own
Yeah,
schools.
they've been taking, like, closing down schools, doing remote learning, stuff like that, because they don't have schools to go. We
Because
actually
they're
talked
using
about
the
this
school
several
buildings,
months ago.
right?
Yeah, they're using the buildings.
What are they called? Like shelters.
Yeah.
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 Right.
You know, I heard that it costs something like $80,000 to put someone up in like one of these hotels for a year, right? So imagine that you are making $60,000 a year, which is, you know, pretty median, and you are paying for all of your stuff and you're barely getting by, but you're working really hard to make that money.
Yep.
And then it's like, oh, well, we'll just, all the stuff that you're working so hard for, we're just going to provide for these people.
Now I can hear the argument in my mind, you know, all the little shoulder devils saying, but these people are so much worse off than you. How can you be so cold-hearted that you're like worried about like whether your kid can go to school or not, or, you know, like, I mean, it just seems, I think people look at it as a very selfish, first world problem perspective when you compare your circumstances to theirs. So how would you guys respond to that?
I would say that I would just ask some questions like, okay, well, what are the circumstances of the people coming through? Like, exactly, where does it break down? What countries are they from? What, you know, what's the financial or persecution status of where they're coming from? The thing is that you can't answer that question because we're not provided that information. And if they give that information, it's all just hearsay. You know, they're ditching their documents. You have no idea where they're coming from. So you cannot say one way or the other if it's for, you know, like reasons that we would normally grant asylum for. They have court dates for that many years in the future. And then the other question is, well, what's the right number of immigration? Is it 1 million people a day? You know, is it 10,000 people a day? And
I think the right number is however many votes
they need,
certain politicians need.
Right. But I mean, just to the average person, you know,
Yeah.
and then to ask the question, well, how many people are coming over? And I think a lot of the people that make the argument about, well, these people need the help or whatever, I think that they don't know how many people are coming over. Like they have no idea of the scope. And so I don't think it's possible to give a number and say, well, I think that it should be this amount, because it might be higher than what's coming over and it might be lower. You know what I mean?
I think, Emily, that question is a logical fallacy in a way, because I don't think that's the point. That's not what we're arguing about here. Obviously, it's overwhelming the system. The system cannot keep up with how many people are coming over. And so because of that, it's causing chaos. And so it's not about being cold-hearted. It's more about doing it in a judicial way, doing it in a systematic, lawful way, because nobody wants them to suffer. Nobody does. Every time I talk to a migrant, which I have, there's quite a few around here. You run into them at the store. You know, they're quiet and they kind of keep to themselves, but they're nice people. Very, you know, they don't want to talk because a lot of them can't speak English, but they are, for the most part, polite and nice. But it's not about that. It's more about, like, the way I see it, our country's already struggling right now with so many other issues. And we are just not in a place, I feel like, where we can take this overwhelming amount of migrants until we get the system in control. And that's the bottom line, is something needs to be done about immigration.
Well, kind of the point that I was making about, like, what's the right number? Because, you know, just to get an idea of, like, there's a whole wide world out there, you know, and like, if you believe that the United States is the best country in the world, that means that every other country is worse. You know what I mean? Meaning that everybody on the planet would have more opportunity if they came to the United States. So if you, like, just look at China, for instance, there's, like, I don't know what it is now, but at one point it was 1.3 billion people in China. About 300 million of them are like wealthy. They live in the big cities. And then there's about 1 billion that are kind of slave farmers. You know what I mean? They're rural, very poor. So like, okay, well, how many Chinese should we take in? If we're just going to take everybody in that's being oppressed by their governments or whatever, should we take in 1 billion Chinese, you know? And what this situation creates is if you have open borders, it's not going to slow down because there's like essentially an infinite number of people that could come to the United States that would benefit from it. And so it's like, okay, well, there's 350 million people in the United States. Like you can double that, you know, like how long would it take to double that if you just truly had your borders open, if you're flying people in from other countries? So, but the point is that it's like, you know, like it could, there's no end to it if you have no limits. And right now what we have are no limits, you know, they cut the wire, they remove barriers or whatever, and they just let as many people in. They're helping them across.
I think an even more fundamental question to ponder is it worth it? Like if I could give something to you so that we are, our fortunes are equal, should I do that until, like, let's say you're so poor and I'm like medium, you know, medium wealthy or something like that. Should I even it out so that we're both poor? Maybe that might be the right thing to do, right? But what if there's some other entity that's like, this person is poor and you've got more, so I'm going to take it from you and then I'm going to give it to them. And I think that that's like, I mean, although all these nuances of the immigration problem are important to, you know, explore, I think that the idea is like, there's no way to make it right when you have the third entity in the mix there. But there, it could be right if it were just like truly donated, right? And there are beautiful stories of many people doing things like that, like getting together church organizations
on their
and stuff
own
like that.
accord,
Of course,
with their own
voluntarily.
agency.
You cut out the theft. That part of the equation poisons the well.
That's right.
You know, and it doesn't. It's not efficient either. Once there's theft, it is inefficient.
It's like if someone were to say like, "Oh, we're gonna house this person with you," or whatever, or like your example, I'm gonna give them half of all my, you know, physical wealth that I have. And it's like, okay, well, that's pretty rough when it's just one other person. And so I guess I'll do that. But then like the next day it's like, okay, well, here's 2 more people. Here's 3 more people. It's also not having any control whatsoever of how many people we're committed to taking care of, you know? Like we can't even properly assess just the people that are in the United States. I'm not talking about illegal immigrants or undocumented, you know, travelers or whatever they want to call them. Just like if you were to assess like, okay, what are the needs in Baltimore? You know, what are the needs in inner city Chicago or Detroit? You know, like we cannot solve these problems easily as it is now, you know?
Yeah.
So the idea of just bringing a limitless number of people into the country, you know, it's just ridiculous.
Well, and Emily just talked about the middle person and how that makes it, you know, not what's the word I'm looking for?
Not efficient.
Not altruic.
Yeah, and not right. Because now as soon as you introduce theft, it's not right anymore.
Well, and not just that. I don't even trust the third party.
Correct.
Like, why can't I just have my money back and I can decide how I help these people on my own? Why do I need a third party that, first of all, takes money from me without my permission? Second, decides what's best for these migrants, which we all know there's weird stuff going on.
Right.
A lot of human trafficking.
Sex trafficking,
drugs.
even among our own government doing it. There's been whistleblowers talking about it. There was one woman in the Department of Homeland Security who they have record of taking these children to stash houses where all these men are. And the government is not only turning the other way and letting it happen, but they're promoting it.
Like paying for it.
Yes.
Or at least helping somewhere along the way.
And so it's like, we don't need the third person involved.
Yeah, we'd be a lot better off without the third person
Yes,
involved.
we would. Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah.
And I just want to say this too. Like, as I talk about this, my heart beats really fast because it upsets me so much. And for those people that don't understand Trump supporters, and maybe there's some of you listening, I don't know. But that is the main reason why people support Trump. That's it. It's this feeling of not being heard from the government. and this idea that there's two-tier justice system in this country, and one for the elite that get whatever they want, and the one for the rest of us. And then there's a third group that just isn't awake yet. And the third group still listens to the first group who keeps telling them they know what's best for them and they believe them. But there will come a time, and it may be happening soon, that they'll start to wake up and realize that the middle man does not have their best interest in mind. The rest of us already know this. We're just waiting for you guys to figure it out.
So there's this email that I want to read a little bit of that is from one of my favorite podcasters. His name is Tom Woods, and he's a historian as well. So he says, all eyes are on Texas, with numerous states having indicated their support for the Lone Star State's defiance of the federal government. Constitutionally, Texas is on solid ground. I've heard some people say this: since immigration per se is not mentioned in the Constitution, although naturalization is, then the relevant power rests with the states. Such people proceed to deploy this argument in defense of so-called sanctuary cities. But if that argument can defend sanctuary cities, it can also, and to the same extent, defend the Texas move to try to staunch the flow of illegals coming through the southern border. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, after all. Now, you may say, I don't care about the Constitution, I care about liberty. You're free to say and think such a thing, and other people are free to be curious as to what American history and its constitutional tradition might have to say about the present situation. And the facts are these. The United States is not now, never was, and was never intended to be a single, undifferentiated blob whose central government exercised plenary, meaning like total power. The states preceded the Union, the same way the bride and groom precede the marriage. The Declaration of Independence speaks of free and independent states, and by states it means places like Spain and France, that have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. The British acknowledged the independence not of a single blob, but of a group of states, which they proceeded to list one by one. Did you guys know that?
Yeah, they were sovereign.
Yeah.
Each state had its sovereign government.
Right. Well, it says right here, the states performed activities that we associate with sovereignty. Massachusetts, Connecticut, and South Carolina outfitted ships to cruise against the British. It was the troops of Connecticut that took Ticonderoga. In New Hampshire, the executive was authorized to issue letters of marque and reprisal. In 1776, it was declared that the crime of treason would be thought of as being perpetuated not against the states united into an indivisible blob, but against the states individually. Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation says the states retain their sovereignty, freedom, and independence. They must have enjoyed that sovereignty in the past in order for them to retain it in 1781 when the Articles were officially adopted. The ratification of the Constitution was accomplished not by a single national vote, but by the individual ratifications of the various states, which each assembled in convention.
Yeah, they had to all sign off on the idea of separating from Britain. They all had to sign off on agreeing to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It was, each one was a sovereign state. It isn't until the Civil War that we see this gigantic shift from state to federal government control of the United States.
Right. Is that the end of the...
It keeps going, but we should talk.
Yeah. Just that the example I always think of is, with the EU, the European Union.
Yeah, that's a perfect example.
It's like we don't think of France as just like, we don't think of it as just like being the EU and France just being like a state, right? We think of France being France. And they have their own president or whatever. They have their own laws. But
what
the EU is now, or more so what the EU kind of started at, is more like what the United States was, where there's a bunch of countries, they got together and like, let's create this free trade zone, and we're going to meet in this one place, and we're going to, if there's any rule, like if there's anything that we can decide that has to do with like protecting this alliance of nations, the border that goes around all of them, we'll kind of figure that out in this. And we'll make sure to kind of like, and only the things that are in the Constitution are what we can do. Everything else, every other sovereign nation that's within this alliance can do however they want in their own country.
Which is funny because it got too much.
Yeah.
They took way too much power, which is why we had Brexit. That was the
Exactly.
main reason, is because all of a sudden they were losing their sovereignty. Each country was losing its sovereignty. And then you know how it started? How it
How?
increased really fast and rapidly pushed forward? Immigration. It was after the Syrian war, when the Syrian refugees were fleeing to Europe, and the European Union was telling each sovereign nation that they must take in so many migrants.
Right.
And so here we are in the United States with the same issue.
And I can't help but the reason they were being told that was not because they had such warm, fuzzy, loving feelings in
No,
their hearts.
it was
I think it was to destroy the culture
Overwhelm
and
the system.
it's to.
It
No.
was
What are the
to
words?
overwhelm the system.
But I think it's more than that. I think it was to destroy their culture
yeah.
and their way of thinking of being independent states.
I think it's also
I agree.
independent, and I think that it feeds into the same idea where it's like, no, we have control over your borders. Like, we have control over what you do, what your laws are, and that's it was kind of this people talking past each other during Brexit, where they're saying, on the one side they're saying, oh, you're just racist against these immigrants, and then they say, it's like, no, we don't want to be legislated from Brussels, and it's like, well, that's just because of this immigration thing. You're just racist. It's like, it's not just that, it's other laws too. And I really think that one of the ways in which England was, their saving grace is the fact that they never converted over to the euro.
That's right.
They
I
always
think that too.
retained the pound sterling. And I think that once you have the common money,
Yeah.
it's like the economic system is just so entwined, because that's the argument they were making
You get
too.
a lot poorer.
Yeah, is that it's
Because the
saying,
inflation, you're subject to all their inflation.
yeah, because then whoever's deciding how many euros,
Yeah,
there
whoever the
are-
money changers
whoever
are.
the money
that's what they're
changers are.
called.
and so they didn't have as strong of an argument when they were saying to Britain, like, oh, this is going to crash your economy. And it's like, well, why? The pound sterling's doing fine. It's like, well, because of trade. And it's like, well, negotiate new trade deals, and they were okay, lo and behold. And what I was going to say, though, bringing it back to Texas, is that there would be no talk of, civil war or secession or Texit or any of these things as strong, or national divorce, as strongly as it has been talked about, if each state was allowed to exercise their sovereignty, under the Constitution, their constitutional rights that they should have, rather than everything being controlled from Washington and completely ignoring the 10th Amendment.
So I want to say a few things about what you just said. One is, back when you were talking about how, we would think of with the EU, and that it's not like France and Spain are just states in the EU. That I was just thinking about how this word has been bastardized so badly. Right? Because the word state, that is the right word for it. They are
Correct.
states in
Yeah.
the EU. It's that through our public education,
Mm-hmm.
we've lost our grip on what that word should mean.
Yeah.
And so, anybody who's gone to public school, including us, right, we're educated with this idea that we live in towns and then cities, counties, and then your state, and then above all, the federal government, and that it's like this pyramid. Right? And this is erroneous. This is really, and that's why it's hard for people to understand what's going on. I remember during COVID when people people who couldn't handle what was going on, with all the things that the media was saying about Trump and COVID and all the panic and fear and everything. And I remember people saying, can't the federal government just make a decision for everybody and we'll just do that? Right? And it's that's some of the best evidence that I ever saw of the damage done by our ridiculous educations that we received. And it's you wouldn't think that just by tweaking one word, what it means to be a state, would be so damaging. But I feel like it is a big thing that's led us to the brink of possibly civil war, because people don't understand how it's supposed to be set up.
It's the same reason why after an election, they say, oh, well, so-and-so won the popular vote, but the other guy, Trump, won the electoral college, the delegates. And then people are like, what? What is this crazy arcane system? Why isn't it just straight democracy? How does this work anyway? Why didn't my vote count? And it's because there's such a divorce in people's brain, like what you're saying, between what states actually are and what the federal government is.
We should play the speech of
Nigel.
Farage, can I?
Sure.
I just love it.
I love
so
it.
much.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, hang on.
So this is it, the final chapter, the end of the road. A 47-year political experiment that the British, frankly, have never been very happy with. My mother and father signed up to a common market, not to a political union, not to flags, anthems, presidents, and now you even want your own army. For me, it's been 27 years of campaigning and over 20 years here in this Parliament. I'm not particularly happy with the agreement we're being asked to vote on tonight, but Boris has been remarkably bold in the last few months, and Ms von der Leyen, he's made it clear, he's promised us there'll be no level playing field. And on that basis, I wish him every success in the next round of negotiations, I really do. But the most significant point is this. What happens at 11 p.m. this Friday, the 31st of January 2020, marks the point of no return. Once we've left, we are never coming back, and the rest, frankly, is detail. We're going, we will be gone. And that should be the summit of my own political ambitions. I walked in here, as I've said before, you all thought it was terribly funny. You stopped laughing in 2016. But my view has changed of Europe since I joined. In 2005, I saw the constitution that had been drafted by Giscard and others. I saw it rejected by the French in a referendum. I saw it rejected by the Dutch in a referendum. And I saw you in these institutions ignore them, bring it back as the Lisbon Treaty and boast you could ram it through without there being referendums. Well, the Irish did have a vote and did say no and were forced to vote again. You're very good at making people vote again, but what we've proved is the British are too big to bully, thank goodness. So I became an outright opponent of the entire European project. I want Brexit to start a debate across the rest of Europe. What do we want from Europe? If we want trade, friendship, cooperation, reciprocity, we don't need a European Commission. We don't need a European Court. We don't need these institutions and all of this power. And I can promise you, both in UKIP and indeed in the Brexit Party, we love Europe. We just hate the European Union. It's as simple as that. So I'm hoping this begins the end of this project. It's a bad project. It isn't just undemocratic, it's anti-democratic, and it puts in that front row. It gives people power without accountability. People who cannot be held to account by the electorate. And that is an unacceptable structure. Indeed, there's an historic battle going on now across the West, in Europe, America, and elsewhere. It is globalism against populism. And you may loathe populism, but I tell you a funny thing, it's becoming very popular. And it has great benefits. No more financial contributions, no more European Court of Justice, no more common fisheries policy, no more being talked down to, no more being bullied, no more Guy Verhofstadt. I mean, what's not to like? I know you're going to miss us. I know you want to ban our national flags, but we're going to wave you goodbye. And we'll look forward in the future to working with you as sovereign.
If you disobey the rules, you get cut off. Could we please remove the flags? Mr. Farage, could we remove the flags, please?
That's it. It's all over. Finished. We've gone.
It's just so great. And I mean,
It's one of my favorite lines is that you're very good at making people vote again. Makes us think of home, right, in Seattle, where they make people vote again for everything when you don't vote the way they want you to.
the relevance this has on our own issue is that they thought it was a good idea to form this union in order to help trade. Isn't that what he said? The purpose was market trade.
Yeah.
That was the point.
An open market.
And the problem, and see that I remember being in Europe in the 90s before the European Union. That's how old I am. I graduated from high school. We went backpacking in Europe, and we would get off the trains and have to exchange money in every country. And I couldn't believe that they put their money together into one currency. I was blown away when they allowed this to happen in the 90s, late 90s. I was like, why? Why are they doing this? And now I see like the British. I mean, you can, to me, I would have predicted that. But just by nature of like, that looks like a bad idea. Putting all of your... Just intuitively. Like, who came up with the idea of doing this? What were they trying to accomplish? Were they trying to be like the U.S.? Is that what the aim was? But my point is, we would do better with local government is always better because they have
they're more accountable.
Yes, they're more.
The closer you are to the people that you make rules for and tax and all of that, the more you have to look people in the eye, the more uncomfortable you're going to be with all of the power that you wield over them.
That's the thing.
Right?
I mean, Biden doesn't know what it's like. He doesn't see the problems that having the border wide open. He doesn't care. He's up in his fancy Connecticut
basement.
home. Yeah, it's true. He's in the basement. But even, he's in Washington, D.C. All these elitists are. They don't know what it's like. And so that's why we need to keep our government small. And states are the best way to do that.
Right.
Our own nation states.
They should, just from a practical point of view, it's better to have 50, laboratories of experiment when it comes to policy and different things than to decree to everyone, like, okay, we're going to do socialized healthcare. And it's like, well, if you want it so bad, if Californians want it so bad, do it in California.
Yeah, experiment.
Yeah, but that's not the kind they want. They want the kind where we, all the 49 other states, pay for it.
Right. They want to distribute that out. Kind of bringing it back to this discussion of the EU, why are we talking about this? And is that we know a lot of really patriotic people. I feel like we are patriotic in our own way. And you don't have to be, just this last year, we studied a lot in our homeschool co-op about the Revolutionary War and the birth of the nation. And this year they studied the Civil War. And, you can still have all of that patriotism and love for the founding fathers and the Constitution and recognize that we have gone way far afield of that. It's like what Nigel Farage was talking about. What he wanted was an open market. What he was promised, was one thing, and what it became in a short amount of time, relatively, was something else. And that is what's going on here. It started off as a group of nations that decided that they're going to federalize and have certain rules and certain ways to defend themselves commonly. And it became something else. It became a super nation.
That's right.
I think if you were to, you could almost name any bureaucracy under the executive. If you got rid of that one, it would make like a huge positive impact. But I think just at the moment, I'm thinking just purely if the federal government did not have the power to tax everybody, that alone would solve a huge amount of our problems. Because I think that's the reason why the states constantly do what the federal government wants. Because there's this little circle of money where the federal government taxes the citizens of any given state, and then the federal government dangles it in front of the state government and says, if you do these things that we want you to do, then we'll give some of this money to you. Right? And it's just like, it's a big corrupt circle.
And it's at every level because there's state
down
grants,
to local.
There's there's county grants, there's city grants,
there's ISD grants,
and there's like individual business grants. And so, it's the question is, assuming that you believe wholeheartedly in taxes and that we should have a common, whatever in Texas, why should the Texas state legislature and the governor have to go and beg for Texas taxes to come back from Washington, D.C.?
Right.
And it doesn't all come back. A lot of it gets lost there. The richest counties in the world are all around Washington, D.C., and they don't produce anything other than
tyranny.
Millionaires.
Well, we probably should move on for the border. I do have more I could read on here, but
I think that we'll probably be revisiting this issue. I think we should maybe just mention real quick I don't know that we've really mentioned anything about there being kind of a standoff.
Yeah.
And so just to recap, the Texas, Abbott said, we're going to be putting up this razor wire. Before that, the evicted CBP from some park in Eagle Pass area, and they put up razor wire. And then the Supreme Court said, no, if the federal government has jurisdiction. And since then, Texas is said, sticking to their guns, like, no, we're going to secure our border. You're delinquent in your duties, so we're going to take them over as per, Title 10 or whatever it was in whichever law. And so Biden said, okay, well, you have until the 24th to let them back in. And they haven't done that. But since then, I think Biden has basically turned down permits for like gas, like power companies and stuff like that in Texas, federal permits, which again,
it's the same problem as the IRS.
It's like, why is the federal government controlling the natural resources of Texas?
Right.
It's like, that's the same way as like Brussels saying to Spain, like, oh, you're not allowed to fish off your coast. And maybe they do that. You know what I mean?
And I don't know what alphabet like organization it is on the federal level that controls who gets permits for oil and
Probably
gas or whatever.
Department of Energy, I would assume.
Okay, so the DOE, let's say. But that the way that like the power was granted to them is in the name of safety.
Right.
It is.
Safety or like security, right? Like we need to secure our energy in times of, so that we're not vulnerable for war or whatever, right? Lots of different reasons.
Which leads us up to Biden's
safety.
Next move right now, which I think you were about to talk
no,
about,
I
Joe.
wasn't. Go ahead.
Well, I have it if you want me to. So I have this article from the Zero Hedge by Tyler Durden.
Tyler Durden. Oh
yeah, this is the Durden guy.
Fight Club.
Donald Duck by Donald Duck.
By our good friend Tyler Durden.
Another good one from our good friend Tyler Durden. I need to watch that movie. Biden blackmail intensifies. Won't shut border until Congress coughs up Ukraine-Israel funds. Okay, so as a Republican governor circled the wagon around Texas, President Biden on Saturday doubled down on a reluctant agreement to secure the southern U.S. border, but only if Congress passes a bipartisan bill that would also allocate funds for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, and would still allow as many as 150,000 illegal crossings per month. So he's not even shutting down the border.
To allow...
He's openly saying...
Allow illegal crossings.
Amazing.
If that bill, this I guess is Biden talking. If that bill were the law today, I'd shut down the border right now and fix it quickly and bring a bipartisan bill that would be good for America and help fix our broken immigration system and allow speedy access to those who deserve to be here, unquote, Biden said, according to Fox News.
It's such a distraction from the obvious, solution to a simple, it's a difficult problem, but it's also simple. Yeah. It's which is why, Trump ran on that in 2016. Yeah. Build a wall. Yeah. I'm going to build a wall. It's that does seem like that would work, doesn't it? Yeah. All you have to do is just stop them.
Yeah. That's it.
And then work it through, you know what I mean? One by one, vetting
and
people.
And I said that, we talked about this, like one of our first episodes, right? Is that you can have, it's the humane thing to do to just say, we're going to completely shut off the border and make it very difficult to cross. So, we'll be able to catch anybody before they're able to do it because it's all being fenced off. And then everybody who comes through can go through a port of entry and be vetted, and that we know, are parents really with their children? Who are these people? And I would even be for, I think it's telling that the Biden administration and just in general, people aren't saying increase the amount of legal immigration. They're not saying that. They're not saying, oh, we're going to let people through the port of entry. We're going to go through a process, but we're going to increase. We're going to make more buildings. We're going to send more people there, and we're going to process people legally in these ways. They're not pushing for that. They're pushing for, this quota of a certain amount of illegal immigration, Yeah. So it's what is the point of this? And to me, my biggest thing about it is, I guess the thing that kind of gets my emotions the most about this issue is the fact of the amount of abuse that people go through in the process of
Legal immigration.
illegal immigration,
Right.
right?
Well, both,
so what is
right?
it like? 2/3 of girls and young women are raped, you
Yeah.
know, like in these like illegal crossings. Maybe it's different now because they're busing them directly to the border. But when you have a black
I'm
market,
pretty sure that there's a lot of stops along
Yeah.
the way that are
But
atrocious.
anytime you create a black market, which is what this is, it's an illegal crossing, you get abuse because people, they're relying on people that are breaking the law.
Cartels.
And then
Right?
the other issue that you have is the so-called, golden ticket ruling that they had, because before, they would apprehend people crossing the border and they would say, well, we can't jail children, so we're going to send them to like family members, or we'll figure like something out for that. And then they had this ruling where this judge said, no, you can't separate children with their parents, and you have to let the kids go. You can't keep them in jail. And so if you had a child with you, then you couldn't be detained. And so, kidnappings went up.
You just
and-
opened up a market.
Yeah,
for
right. So that
kidnapping.
as long as you have a child with you, then you
You didn't have to prove it was
you
your
didn't
child.
have to prove your child. I mean, how could they, right? They're processing all these people. But how could you, like, even in the time that you would do that, you would have to hold them. And then like, oh, look at these kids in cages. And so then they were letting them through. And so they don't know, you know? It's like, what easier thing can you do at this time then, if you're a child trafficker,
agree.
than to take a child and then go over the U.S. border,
Yep.
right?
Right.
Because then now you're even outside of the jurisdiction of Mexico or wherever you are. You're in America now, and nobody can ask who you are or what you're doing.
I remember when Trump was in office, I don't know what the number was, but I know it was a lot less of illegal crossings, correct? Because they were actually kind of trying to patrol the border.
But at the same time, there were definitely caravans being organized that were
Right.
going up through. But
Right.
yeah,
But then I remember once Biden took office and he from the podium said, "We want you,
right.
come on over." I mean, even his words were not that different from my paraphrasing.
Well,
I think it
and
was,
then-
we want you. Habla chimrada. Yay!
Roaches on my legs. Kids.
we want you roaches. on
Yeah,
my
you know the
legs.
thing.
And then it was like
on,
immediately
man.
there were like thousands of people at the border, right? Like they understood
Right.
what he was saying. And I remember thinking before, well, but then if you just like, I can hear the arguments again with the shoulder devils, right? If you just like, then stop and like shut the border, not shut it, but control the border. And then like they can't come through and then they're all just stuck there. And how are they going to get word? And there's, I mean, I don't know. I was just imagining all this chaos and like these sad, hot, starving, thirsty travelers. You know what I mean? And it's like, it is concerning, right?
Yeah.
But then I realized I read something the other day and it was like, once they put up this wire, like this last week or something, that there was like one person who showed up.
Yeah.
It was one guy. And I thought, of course, why did I think that they didn't have communication? Like,
Right.
why wouldn't I think that the cartels would have a smooth operation? It's an ugly operation, but it's smooth.
Yeah.
Because it is the free market.
Yeah.
It's a bad market, but it's free. And so they are efficient, right?
Yeah.
And so they're not going to be doing these trips if they
Yeah.
can't get through. They're going to get the memo
Yeah.
ahead of time.
Well, and it's also just this question of like, okay, well, let's say you did have this nightmare, scenario where everybody's just like standing on the other side of the border. Like,
Right.
there's nothing stopping the U.S. from like giving them humanitarian aid. We give
Right.
people humanitarian aid in countries all over the world.
Right.
You know what I mean? You
Right.
can put together, packages
Packets,
of
yeah.
whatever. People
We do it all the time
people
when we
would
go to
do
war.
it here. Yeah. And
And churches do it a lot too.
yeah,
Like,
we've
I
done it
know-
at our church a lot.
So Biden is such this is so misleading what he just said. That he said that in order for him to shut the border, that bill would need to be passed. And according to this article, it says, except, as many have pointed out, Biden doesn't need Congress or the bill to do that right now. As we noted yesterday, House Speaker Mike Johnson debunked the claim, saying, quote, President Biden falsely claimed yesterday he needs Congress to pass a new law to allow him to close the southern border. But he knows that is untrue. As I explained to him in a letter last year and have specifically reiterated to him on multiple occasions since he can and must take executive action immediately to reverse the catastrophe he has created. Johnson continued. Anyway, so there's a lot of people that are calling him out saying that he is just using this as political maneuvering.
It's hard to not look at it and think anything other than like, what a thug, right? Like for anyone in his position, right, to like just stop causing the problem. That's all we're asking.
Here's my
it's
question
almost
for you
like,
guys.
Well,
it's a nice country you got here.
Yeah, I might cause it for a price, or I might stop causing this chaos and damage and stuff if you pay me some more.
Okay, here's my question. Do we give money to the Ukraine?
No. What?
I mean, we do, but we shouldn't. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, no,
Oh.
I'm just wanting to know your opinions on this. I totally disagree with us helping Ukraine and Russia at all.
What? I mean,
I am
Because
done
they're
with
feel like
corrupt
I just-
too. It gets
I must have missed a
laundered
step.
through. I mean, it's like what we were talking about before with all of the waste having the third entity
Yeah.
involved.
Right.
It's not even just our own federal government taking a bunch of it and however they launder it. It's also the Ukrainian. Ukraine is known for being insanely corrupt.
Right. And
Right?
I think that's what a lot of this is our own corrupt government covering up their own
Absolutely.
their own corrupt deeds in
Right.
the Ukraine,
Yeah.
and they need our money to do it.
And
So-
even if they weren't, let's say they weren't even just like enriching themselves in whatever laundered way that they are. And it was just going towards the military gear and all that stuff, the military help. It's just prolonging this awful fight that's causing death
Yeah.
and destruction. It's
and
terrible.
also it's communicating to Russia that we're the enemy. We're taking sides.
Right.
That's one way of fighting war. Russia has said if we support Ukraine by giving them any kind of help, arms, equipment, military stuff, they will take that as an act of war. So I'm just like, first of all, I never thought I'd get to this point being, one of the biggest Bush fans back in the day. Of course, I've changed my political stance since then. But I'm kind of anti-war now. I really don't think that we have any business of being over there fighting a conflict that doesn't really have much to do with our country. I hate to say it, but that's how I feel.
Well, I think it was.
It's a conflict that's perpetuated by
Our
our
country.
Yes.
Yes, it's embarrassing.
Well, it's like, I mean, people, I don't know, equivocate and they say like, well, we didn't know at the time, or like, we don't know if like things were better, but you just look at the Afghanistan war.
It's
we were
horrible.
there for 20 years. We were there long enough
And that
for people to be
did
born
have
and
something
then
to do with
grow
us,
up
right?
and then fight in the war.
that did have something to do with us.
Right. Well, at first it did.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
But then, some experts think that we could have been out by, the end of the year.
Right. Probably.
But
Don't get me started.
But if you say like, oh, well, the Taliban and all this stuff, it's like, okay, the Taliban, which we created, right, when we were fighting the Soviets again, right?
It's so
and,
true.
And
It
so
never
it's like,
ends.
if you go backwards in history and you say, okay, well, there's this war. Well, what was the result of this war? Well, it wasn't that great, but we didn't know that at the time. Well, okay, well, what about this war? Well, it wasn't that great, but
It
these
sounds
things
like
could
they're
have
just
happened.
a little bit too retarded to be in charge of wielding war.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well-
If every time they're like, oh yeah, we didn't know.
Yeah,
You know?
well, we thought they were weapons of mass destruction. Well, I mean, we did kind of lie about it at the UN, but we thought. The point is like, if you're going to kill people, right? You should be sure. You should be very, very sure. And people might say, well, this is a just war because the Ukraine was attacked, but you're not looking at the alternative. Is that they were ready to come to the negotiating table, and Ukraine is not going to win, and we can fund them forever. It's not going to change the situation, just like we funded Afghanistan for 20 years and trained them up and did all this stuff. Once we weren't doing that anymore, then it was over. They just fell like a house of cards, and we have no reason to believe that the Donbass region or whatever is not going to be exactly the same. And so you prolong the war. And the way that
here's my next question.
Wait, just real quick on Emily's point earlier about funding it and not knowing where the money is going. Rand Paul, he proposed a bill or like an amendment to one of the funding bills to say that we need an audit. We need to know exactly where this money's going. And they attacked him mercilessly about it. Like, well, at a time like this, and it's like, what could be more revealing that when you say, well, where's the money going? People just start freaking out, and that's exactly what happened.
Okay, so here's my next one. So in this bill, there's money that he wants for, we just talked about Ukraine. The next one's Israel.
You
I don't
sure you
think
want
we
to
have
open
to
this
get
can of
into
worms?
this.
I know. So no supporting money to Israel.
I think, I mean, I don't think that we should fund anyone, to tell you the
All right,
truth.
last one, Taiwan.
I think that we should, if
Might
we're
be the
worried
most
about,
tempting.
we're worried about superconductors, then we need to start building them here. And
Yeah, it'd
you
be
know,
better for our
the-
economy too.
The thing
And
about
wait, sorry, just really fast, like stuff like that. You know what I think one of the most devastating things is that nobody in our like the last 3 generations knows how to do anything.
right.
And even though it's like, of course, we don't all want to just be like factory workers forever or something, but wouldn't it be nice to know how to do something?
yeah,
you
and
know?
the United States is a big country,
And
you know,
you did. I mean, ideally, just looking at like, well, what should people do? What things do we want to know how to do? And like, in what ways do we want to be independent? I always think it would be great if we had like factories that made all kinds of interesting things again here, so that like young people could learn how to do things. Not that they do that forever,
yeah,
right? But it's like the way that I grew up was doing like lots of different jobs as a teenager and a
Yeah.
young adult. And I really like, that's great. I think
Yeah, it helps
Yeah.
you.
instead
it
of
helps you in a
just
lot of
like,
ways.
it's like, no, just go to school,
yeah,
learn nothing marketable, no marketable skills. And then afterwards, you know, go and try and get a job with a certificate, which is becoming increasingly useless.
Well, I think that that's like one of the things that happened. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn on this, but I think in Libya and in other countries where, you know, the World Economic Forum and the International Bank and all these people and these groups said, oh, well, your country is really good at producing this one. It was like coffee beans or something like, I don't remember exactly what it was, barley, some thing that they, you know, was well suited to do. So you should only do that and not produce these other things that you need because you could just trade for them, right? It's specialization. We all know that this is, a good economic principle. Except what happens, what could happen is that once you do that and then you, I don't know, say that you want to go to the gold standard, right? And then all of a sudden you get accused of crimes against humanity and all these things and then you're killed. And maybe you are a bad dictator, who knows? But if the US or other countries decide to do an embargo, a trade embargo or sanctions against you, well, that's it. You have nothing now. You have the grain that you can grow.
It's a
and
very fragile,
yes.
dependent
it's a fragile and dependent
position to be in.
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
Well, now
just
I
one
know
thing.
where you stand.
just
on the
one thing,
Money for all these countries.
Well, it's like what Rand Paul said, that foreign aid is stealing money from poor people in rich countries and giving them to rich people in poor countries.
Oh, that's a
Right.
good way to say
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
Okay, final
It would-
thing.
Sorry,
I
just
want to say something about Taiwan real quick before we leave, is that Taiwan in particular, they have a policy, Taiwan and China, of like, yeah, we all know what's going on here and we're not going to rock the boat. And the only people that rock the boat is the United States. It's like when Pelosi went over to Taiwan. Like that is something that is going to rile up feathers, you know? It's going to make things more dangerous.
Yeah.
And they don't need that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? They're stable as it is.
Barely.
The people
Like
that
they're
are
hanging on.
rattling sabers, it's not Taiwan, it's not China, it's the U.S.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of corruption in our government that's causing disarray
Wait,
across the world. That's what you're saying, bottom line. Okay, so I thought we probably should wrap it up, but I wanted, before we wrapped it up, to end with just telling our listeners what's on the ballot for this primary, which is March 5th, 2024. So should I do that?
Yeah.
All right. Here's the ballot for 2024 for, I'll read, I guess, both. For the Republican running for president, obviously it's Trump. And then Nikki Haley, Ryan Binkley, which I don't even know who that is. Do you guys know? Nope. And David Stuckenberg. And that's basically it. Everyone else has dropped out. For the Democrats, it's
Those are people running. Wait, what positions are they?
president.
Running? What?
So it's Donald Trump, Ryan Binkley, Nikki Haley, David Stuckenberg.
Huh. Okay.
Never even heard of David Stuckenberg, Ryan Binkley. For the Democrats, it's Joe Biden, Gabriel Cornejo, Starlock. I didn't even know there were all these people running. Starlock. I like the
With a
name
name like
Starlock.
that, yeah.
That's kind of cool. Why can't he be Republican? Is his name Star John Locke? Anyways. Frankie Lozada, Armando Perez Serrato, Dean Phillips, Kink Ugar.
Cenk Uygur.
Who is that?
He's like one of the hosts of the Young Turks, which is like
Is that
an
right?
online.
Marianne Williamson.
I like Marianne Williamson, even though she's wrong about everything. She's really nice.
I don't know her.
She ran last time. She got on the debate stage, I think, a couple times.
Oh, okay.
In the last presidential election. Oh, because the Democrats actually had a primary. She's kind of like woo-woo love. In order to defeat the darkness, which is Trump, we need love, the light of love. Whatever.
She's a hippie.
She's a hippie. Yeah, she's got a bunch of books about being a hippie. But she was actually on Timcast not too long ago, and there were a lot of things like they brought up the banned books, right, which we've talked about on this podcast. And she's like, "Well, I don't think that should happen this way." And then they read to her like passages of those books, and she was like really surprised. And she saw one book or some worksheet or something that was basically like about white privilege and like that it was a pledge, something like that white people should like sign, saying like, I know that I've been privileged above like other people or whatever. And like she was like almost in tears about it. So it's kind of interesting.
Okay, so for the Democrats, for U.S. Senate, it's Ted Cruz is the Republican incumbent. Holland Red Gibson is running against him on the Republican ticket with Rufus Lopez. And on the Democrats, there's Colin Allred, Mary Gomez, Mark Gonzalez, Roland Gutierrez, Robert Hassan, Steve Kiao, Heli Rodriguez Prilliman.
Maybe Emily should be reading these.
Carl Oscar Sherman, and I don't know how to say this one. Thierry Chenko. For the U.S. House, our district is District 23 here in Medina County. So those that are running would be Victor Avila, Julie Clark, Tony Gonzalez, Brandon Herrera, and Frank Lopez Jr. versus Lee Bossinger and Santos Limon. So I'll tell you who I'm not voting for. Tony Gonzalez.
Right.
I'm done with him.
You don't like that guy.
So
Cool.